The aliens were ready to shut down an entire colony because of a small capsule of Earthly Basil. Not because the plant was killing them. On the contrary, it was because after smelling it, they could no longer endure isolation on their own. Tess realized something was wrong the moment the alien operator flinched, not from the falling container, but from her hand near his. And then the emergency airlock began to fall apart. And it turned out that the only thing keeping the station from panicking was the human habit of standing too close to one another. The container lurched sideways before the signal turned green, and Tess only had time to curse under her breath. Her sticky gloves slipped, the guide rail jerked, and the cargo hung on the edge, as if it had decided to change its mind. She stepped forward, already far too close to the alien operator, and simply caught the crate with her hands. He recoiled, not from the cargo, from her. "I've got it," Tess said curtly, bracing her shoulder against the rail. "Don't wait for the command. It's going down any second." The light strip on the wall blinked with a delay. Too late. She had already shoved the container back into its slot and kicked the jammed latch loose with her foot. The metal creaked as if offended. The airlock smelled the way it always did. Fuel, wet insulation, overheated cables. The air was thick, clinging to the throat. Condensation ran down the walls, dripping onto gloves, and it constantly felt like you were working inside someone's damp palm. From the alien side, no one came closer than 3 paces. They stood in their niches, passing signals through light and delay, as if time itself were part of their protection. This had always irritated Tess. By the time you waited for their coordination, the cargo was already falling. "Quote 2, she said, reaching for the alien's cable herself. The operator froze, literally froze. His indicators flickered, but his body did not move. "I'm just fixing it," Tess tossed out, already pulling the contact tight. "There, get back to work." A second of silence. Then the system came back to life, but more slowly. She had noticed this before. The closer she got, the worse they moved. One would retreat, another would lock up, a third would start demanding a zone clearance through formal signals. And every time she had to choose. Respect the gap and lose the cargo, or push forward and scare them. Tess always chose the latter. "Your whole setup here is held together by a prayer," she muttered, lifting the next container. "If we wait for your lights, we won't make it before the lockout." The light strip responded coldly. "Maintain distance." "Yeah, I know," she snorted, "except it's about to slide again." And it did. She managed to catch it with her knee, pinned it to the guide rail, and for a second found herself almost flush against the alien operator. He recoiled so sharply that he bumped his panel. The cargo flow stuttered. "Hey, easy." Tess raised a palm, as if that could help. "I don't bite." There was no answer, only the slow restoration of the signal. The airlock gave a short beep, a warning for the next cycle. Time was running out. Tess drew in a breath and suddenly froze for half a second. Amidst all that stench, there was something out of place. At first, she thought she had imagined it. After shifts like these, you sometimes sense strange things. The brain gets tired, starts filling in blanks. But the smell was too specific. Not just any spice, not something abstract. Fresh, green, with a slight bitterness. Basil. She even gave a small smirk to herself. "Here? Seriously?" "Line 3, picking up the pace," she said louder to shake the thought, and grabbed the next container. But the smell didn't vanish. On the contrary, it became sharper as she leaned toward the cargo stream. On the other side of the airlock, something had changed. One of the alien operators straightened up slightly. His indicators stabilized faster than usual. Nearby, another did the opposite, retreating sharply and requesting a zone purge. Tess noted this in the back of her mind, but her hands were working faster than her head. She signaled her team, grabbed another crate, and only then spotted a transparent capsule among the grimy containers. A standard cylinder, a protective casing, nothing special. Only the marking was wrong, too simple, as if someone had been in a hurry and didn't bother to check. She ran her glove over it, wiping away a layer of dirt. Inside were seeds, small dark ones, and the scent intensified. "Stop," Tess said, though the flow didn't halt. Light signals twitched, requests, delays. Underscore, quote _14, ___, she asked, tapping the capsule. Quote 15. The answer didn't come immediately. First, a pause, then a chain of cold confirmations. Cargo matches the route. Do not interfere. No, it doesn't match, Tess said quietly. The marking is crooked. She looked around. Several aliens were now staring directly at her. Not at her hands, not at the cargo, at the capsule. And the reactions varied. One retreated even further, almost pressing against the wall. Another, conversely, took a small step forward and stopped, as if restraining himself. Tess gripped the capsule tighter than necessary. Listen, she said, if this is some thing of yours, just say so. But this smells like... The airlock opened more abruptly than usual, and Vale Toon appeared in the doorway. He didn't rush, but the space around him seemed to level out. The light signals immediately recalibrated to his presence. Human operator, his voice came through the system, slightly delayed but without a tremor. Step away from the cargo. Tess didn't even pull her hand away at first. Quote, 24, quote, she said. Quote, 25, quote, 26, quote, sharper now. She exhaled and placed the capsule back into the stream, but she didn't retreat far. Half a step, not 3. We're losing time, she said. If you want to finish the transfer before the lockdown, let's keep it moving. Vale Toon paused. Not because of the system, he was choosing his words. Quote, 29, quote, he said. Quote, 30, quote. Tess gave a short laugh. Quote, 31, quote, 32, quote. She looked back. Yes, one still hadn't returned to his panel. Then tell them to work faster, she replied calmly. Or let me finish it. A second of silence. The airlock beeped again, a reminder of the time. Vale Toon looked at the cargo stream, then at the capsule, then back at Tess. Quote 35, quote. He shifted his emphasis slightly. Quote 36, quote 37, quote. Tess narrowed her eyes. She didn't budge. Somewhere deep in the airlock, that scent wafted again. Clean, living, alien to this place. And one of the operators near her suddenly steadied his breathing. It was audible even through the filters. Tess slowly shifted her gaze to Vale Toon. Quote 40 __. He didn't answer immediately, and that was the answer itself. The airlock began to close for the next cycle, and the cargo flow accelerated on its own, without any commands. They would have to keep going, and now no one was pretending this was just another dirty run. During the third cycle, one of the loaders simply stopped responding. It didn't break, it just froze between commands, holding a container over the rail while condensation water ran down the hull. Quote 41 _ Tess muttered, throwing up her hand and crawling under the load herself. Proximity alarms immediately flared up from the alien side. Someone demanded a line clearance. Someone else, conversely, sharply accelerated the command flow, as if they wanted to help her clear the container faster and end this moment. Tess pried the guide rail with a crowbar, shoved the crate into its slot with her shoulder, and only then wiped her wet face with her sleeve. The air grew even heavier. The airlock was being cycled almost without pause, and the filters were no longer coping with the humidity. Everything stuck to her fingers. Even the touch panels sometimes required a second tap to respond. Quote 42, quote, she remarked, passing by an alien console. Quote 43, quote 44, quote. The reply came with a delay, too long of a delay. Tess noticed an open logistics string on the panel. Not on purpose, the screen was right in front of her while she was tightening a container fastener. The route flashed for only a second. Sector Kel 9. She frowned. She had heard that code before. An old transfer hub near the outer ring. 6 months ago, people spoke of it as being closed. Quote 45 __, she asked without looking back. It grew quiet instantly. Even the machinery seemed to slow down. Vale Toon stepped closer than before. Not right up to her, but close enough so his voice didn't go through the general channel. Quote 46. Quote 47. She was already reaching for the next container when she smelled the basil again. Stronger now. Not a stray scent, a steady aroma, as if a capsule had been opened recently. Tess ran her scanner over the markings. The code didn't match the manifest. Half your cargo here is moving under fake tags. Quarantine shipments have separate clearance. Quarantine? She gave a short laugh. Is that what you call a colony with no supplies? Veiltoon didn't answer immediately, and that was enough. Tess hooked the next container and pushed it further along the rail. After the pirates? She asked. Did they clean you out there? The sector has been declared biologically unstable. That's not an answer. It is sufficient. One of the alien operators nearby suddenly lost his rhythm. His neck indicators twitched too rapidly. Another, conversely, unexpectedly and smoothly picked up the flow, cutting the lag nearly in half. Tess caught this contrast automatically now. Some broke down near her, others began to work better. She crouched by the sorting panel, brushed the water off the screen, and quickly scrolled through the shipping log before the next cycle locked out access. Empty rows, canceled flights, medical containers returned unopened. The residential sectors of the colony were flashing red almost without interruption. And then she saw the graph, panic episodes. At first, Tess thought she had misunderstood the translation, but the lines were simple even without the language. Spikes, dips, spikes again, and a sharp decline in 3 sectors. On the same days when containers marked as technical fertilizers were sent there. She slowly looked up. It's seeds, isn't it? Veiltoon instantly closed the panel channel. Too late. Quote 58, quote 59, quote 60. The system translated the word underscore underscore quote underscore 61 underscore underscore with a delay. Veiltoon noticed it too. Tess straightened up and immediately brushed her shoulder against an alien operator. He inhaled sharply but did not retreat. On the contrary, it was as if he held his ground, forcing himself to remain at the console. She instinctively raised her palm. Sorry, didn't mean to. The operator didn't respond, but his cargo flow no longer faltered. Veiltoon was no longer looking at the capsule. He was looking at her. Your species misunderstands stress, he said quietly. When destabilization occurs, contact must be reduced. To what end? To prevent the state from spreading. Tess blinked. Wait, you actually leave people on their own? Isolation prevents a chain reaction. She remembered the empty residential sectors in the log. Cancelled household supplies. Closed common areas. Suddenly, everything looked worse. It didn't look like a quarantine. It looked like a place where people had stopped living together. Quote 69. Quote, she said. Quote 70. Quote, quote 71. Quote. The airlock beeped again, louder than usual. The system was demanding a shorter cycle time. Condensation was already dripping from the ceiling directly onto the exposed contacts. Tess cursed, stepped toward a hanging cooling module, and manually struck a jammed valve. It jerked and started working. Several alien operators simultaneously turned their heads toward her. To them, this again looked like madness, touching an emergency circuit with her hands, and without permission no less. But the temperature in the airlock began to drop. Veiltoon exhaled slowly through his filter. You interfere with everything you see, because it's breaking. Sometimes the system must wait it out, and sometimes it's already dying, just filing pretty reports. He fell silent. Tess looked back at the closed route to the colony. Secret shipments, fake tags, Basil among the quarantine cargo, and statistics where alien panic dropped alongside the scent of Earth faster than after their own protocols. Someone was continuing to feed the colony by bypassing the system, not smuggling for money, doing it so that someone there would survive until the next trip at all. And judging by Veiltoon's face, he realized one more thing before she did. It was already too late to keep humans outside of this quarantine. The alarm signal didn't come as a sound. It simply started to lag, first by a fraction of a second, then by 2. The panels registered touches, but responded as if through water. The light arrays flashed out of sync, and the entire line suddenly grew sluggish, like an old mechanism that had long been begging to stop, yet they kept turning it. Tess caught the rhythm faster than the meaning. Underscore underscore quote underscore 76 underscore underscore, she snapped, already intercepting the next container. Veiltoon replied, but even his voice came through the system with a delay. Almost immediately, the airlock shuddered. Not hard, a brief jolt, as if someone outside was testing its strength. A new indicator lit up on the panel. Not a failure, worse, a circuit warning. Tess didn't wait for a translation. Quote 79. She was already scanning for open channels. One of the screens flickered. The colony sector. The far one. That very route. The status bar was twitching like a pulse. Quote 80 Veiltoon said more softly. Initiating isolation. Wait, Tess turned sharply. What kind of isolation? A local circuit rupture. We are closing the sector to preserve the rest. He said it calmly, without emphasis, like a protocol that had been written long ago. Tess looked at the graph. There was no sharp break, only a decline. A slow one. They're still holding on there, she said. That's not a rupture. It will be a rupture in 3 cycles. Then we have 3 cycles. We have one acceptable one. The airlock shuddered again, this time more noticeably. Somewhere in the wall, a lock screeched, failing to fully seat into its groove. Humidity rose even higher. The filters began to hum, as if they couldn't cope. Tess swore under her breath and stepped toward the panel. Quote 91. Quote 92. Quote 93. Quote 94. Quote 95, she said, not even raising her voice. She just spoke faster. A pause. Underscore, underscore. Quote, underscore. 96, underscore, underscore. Veiltoon replied. Tess closed her eyes for a second. Then she exhaled and moved. Not toward the panel, toward the people, toward her own and the others simultaneously. Line 2, listen up, she shouted. Rerouting the flow. Everything going to the colony. Bring it here. Light signals flashed. Several alien operators immediately signaled a restriction. Contact forbidden, came from 3 channels almost at once. Then watch and stay out of the way, Tess snapped. She grabbed the nearest container, pivoted it manually, and shoved it into the adjacent slot. You, she jabbed a finger at one of the operators nearby. Here, no, closer. Yes, here. He froze. Tess didn't stop. She simply took him by the forearm and moved him half a step. He flinched as if struck. His indicators flashed chaotically, but the panel under his hand immediately came to life. Quote 104, she said, her voice softer now. Quote 105. She didn't wait for the next container. She pulled it out of the flow herself and passed it along. Chain link, she barked. Not by the signals, by hand. Her own crew understood instantly. 2 were already standing closer, catching the cargo without pauses. On the alien side, it looked worse. One operator retreated so sharply he nearly knocked over his station. Another froze, motionless, even though the flow demanded action. A third took a step forward and stayed. Tess noticed this out of the corner of her eye. There, she said. It's working. You are creating additional instability. Veiltoon's voice sounded right beside her, not through the general channel. He stepped closer, too close by their standards. Quote 111, she replied without looking at him. Quote 112. Quote 113. Quote 114. She shoved a tool into his hands. He didn't take it. Tess didn't stop. She just pressed it in. A brief touch. Veiltoon froze, literally for a second. Then he gripped the tool. This circuit, she said quickly, pointing at the panel, needs to be held manually. The automation can't handle it. He looked at her hand, which had been on his only a second ago. Then he shifted his gaze to the panel and did it. The movement was precise, nothing wasted. The flow leveled out immediately. Tess didn't even comment. She was already dragging the next module. Underscore underscore, quote, underscore 118 underscore underscore, she shouted. Someone behind caught it and passed it on. A rhythm began to form, not by signals, by people. The airlock jolted again, but this time the line didn't break apart. One of the alien operators near Tess sharply inhaled. She turned. He was standing nearly flush against another. His indicators were jumping, but his hands were working. Hang in there, she said briefly. He didn't answer, but he didn't retreat, and he didn't break. Somewhere to the side, a translucent capsule flickered. That very one. It had been moved closer to the center so as not to get in the way. The scent grew stronger for a second. Tess caught it and immediately switched back to her work. But she had already noticed. Where they stood closer together, where those 3-step pauses were absent, the operators moved more smoothly. They twitched less. They froze less, quote, she tossed out without turning around. Veiltoon replied instantly. Convenient version. You secrete substances that... Right now I'm secreting sweat and anger, she interrupted. And that's definitely not a stabilizer. He fell silent. Nearby, one of the alien operators who had previously retreated took another step forward, too close to Tess. She instinctively touched his shoulder, guiding him toward the panel. He flinched, but stayed. And his line didn't break. Tess gave a short smirk, mostly to herself. Quote 126, quote, she said, her voice lower now but fast. Quote 127, quote 128, quote 129, quote. The airlock beeped again, sharply, a demand to shorten the cycle. Humidity was dropping, but now the pressurization was starting to fail. From somewhere behind came a dry, whistling sound. Tess said. Veiltoon replied, "We might lose the entire airlock." Tess looked at him. He was still holding the circuit with his hands, and he wasn't backing away. Quote 134 she said. He didn't correct her informal tone. He simply nodded, and they continued. No longer arguing, not proving anything, working in a single rhythm. The airlock held on the edge, the chain held on the people, and somewhere far away, in the sector that should have been cut off by now, the status lines stopped falling so rapidly. Not for long, but it was enough so that none of them took a step back again. The cooling valve jammed halfway again, and now it had to be held in place with a foot. One of the alien operators stood next to Tess, his elbow almost touching her shoulder, and because of this, his neck indicators were trembling, but his hands were working faster than they had an hour ago. The air in the airlock became thick, like after a long rain in a closed hangar. The filters could no longer pull the smells apart. Burnt insulation, wet glove fabric, alien antiseptics, and in the middle of it all, basil again. Steady now, as if someone had crushed the leaves right inside the ventilation. "It's been moved," Tess said, looking up. The seed capsule was no longer by the cargo flow, but near the service console. Someone had tried to hide it among the old cables. Veiltoon noticed it at the same time she did. One of the operators turned away from the panel abruptly. Tess pointed a finger. Quote 136 quote 137 Veiltoon replied too quickly. That was what convinced her. She walked to the console, wiped the wet screen with her sleeve, and opened the maintenance log. The system was lagging. Lines crawled out in jerks. First came the usual emergency requests: overheating, loss of supply, panic episodes, then manual ventilation adjustments, and one repeating parameter, common sector. Tess frowned. "Did you have common areas in the quarantine?" The silence proved louder than the siren. The underground gardener at the far panel jerked and tried to block access. Tess managed to seize control first. The residential blocks of Kel 9 flashed on the diagram. Red sectors almost everywhere, and a few yellow islands. The kitchen, the repair bay, the old water recycling zone. All the places where humans usually huddle together. "Come on," Tess muttered. "Are you serious?" Veiltoon stared at the schematic as if he were seeing it for the first time. Quote 141, he said softly. Quote 142. Quote 143. Tess scrolled further. The logs were messy, with some files manually deleted, but the system left traces anyway. Power surges, excess water consumption, ventilation running through the night. Someone was living there, together, unofficially, bypassing the protocol, and those were the exact sectors where the errors and breakdowns occurred. Nearby, an overloaded interface hissed. The secret gardener stepped sharply toward the panel. His voice cracked more than it should have. Tess turned to him. He froze. Veiltoon slowly shifted his gaze. The technician was standing far too close to the other alien operators. Only now did Tess notice that no one was backing away from him. The scent of basil clung to him most strongly. "I did not spread the contagion," he forced out. "I was trying to keep the sectors functional." "With what? Salad?" Tess gave a weary smirk. "The humans used to gather in your service zones," the technician said, not looking at her. "During repairs, during meals, while waiting for cycles. They stayed together when the systems were overloaded." He spoke as if he were confessing to something filthy. After the pirate deal, the breakdowns began. The isolation was tightened. The errors increased. They stopped leaving their compartments. The technician gulped air through his filter. And then one human loader left a container of greens near the ventilation. Tess snorted. Of course they did. After that, several operators began gathering in the service zone for longer than the permitted time. The panic spikes subsided. Veiltoon abruptly opened an archive channel, seemingly no longer asking the system for permission. The old files loaded slowly, very old files. Service records appeared on the screen, not medical ones, administrative. Tess blinked. Vale Toon read in silence. The next line popped up with a delay. Shared crisis experience leads to the erosion of autonomous responses and an increase in interspecies loyalty. Wow, Tess said quietly. So that's what you were afraid of. One of the nearby operators heard the translation and jerked away. Vale Toon didn't move. Tess saw his breathing rhythm slowly falter. It is an old protocol, he finally said. After the contact wars, some colonies ceased to function entirely without external species. There were cases of mass abandonment of their own structures. And you decided it was better to die separately? He didn't answer. Because the answer was already hanging on the screen. Isolation wasn't introduced as a cure. It was discipline. The colonists were taught to experience fear apart from one another, so that no one would grow more accustomed to outside support than to the system. Tess looked at the residential sector schematic again. The yellow zones had held out longer than the others, and not because of the plant. They were simply gathering there. The basil reminded them of humans, she said slowly. Your brains weren't clinging to the plant. They were clinging to the place. The technician nodded without raising his head. In the human sectors, the air was always shared. Food, noise, conversations while working. After the scent appeared, the operators began emerging from isolation, just for a short time at first. And then they stopped falling apart, Tess finished. For a second, it became very quiet in the airlock. Only water dripped from the ceiling onto the cables. Vale Toon stared at the archive, as if it might explode at any moment. __quote_171 __, he began and fell silent. Tess picked up the seed capsule. The transparent plastic was warm from the humid air. The evidence no longer looked dangerous. It looked pathetic, more than anything. Someone had lugged it through technical tunnels, risking their career and apparently their entire life, just so the people in the colony could start sitting next to each other again. __quote_, 172 __, Tess asked. Vale Toon didn't answer immediately. Outside the airlock, something slammed against the hull again, harder this time. Somewhere far away, the colony continued to sag. Quote, 173, quote, he said finally. Quote, 174, quote. Tess looked at the operators around them. No one was standing at the original gap anymore, and it seemed everyone had noticed. The airlock jerked 3 times in a row, and then stopped closing all the way. The lock reached the groove, struck the edge, and bounced back with a short, dry click. The indicators flashed without rhythm. Someone nearby cursed through a translator so sharply that the system didn't have time to smooth out the intonation. Tess looked up. What was that just now? No answer was needed. On the main screen, instead of the usual cycle, lines of manual restriction began to crawl upward. The Kel-9 sector was no longer sagging block by block. Now it was collapsing in entire chunks. A sharp signal rang through the airlock. Preparing for full isolation, one of the alien operators recoiled from their panel. No, the secret gardener with the basil said softly. Vale Toon was already staring at the data, too motionless. Quote, 178, quote, Tess said. Quote, 179, quote, 180, quote, 181, quote, 182, quote. The airlock was hit again. This time, the mounting screeched so loudly that the vibration traveled through the floor. Water from the ceiling splashed onto the panels. Someone cried out. Tess turned around. One of the operators was sitting right on the floor near the wall. His neck indicators were darting far too fast. Those around him had already begun to move away, automatically, out of habit. She stepped toward him and had almost raised her hand when she saw the others. They weren't looking at him. They were looking at Vale Toon, waiting. Tess suddenly realized why. It wasn't because of panic. They were waiting to see if he would give permission to break everything at once. Vale Toon slowly shifted his gaze to his operator, then to the isolation line. Then he said, quote, 183, quote. The silence hit harder than the siren. Even Tess blinked. Quote, 184, quote. He continued, louder now. Several operators froze. One simply stepped back. Another switched off his panel and stared at Veiltoon, as if he didn't understand the translation. Someone began. Veiltoon's voice turned harsh. Tess didn't give anyone time to think. "All right, let's move," she shouted. "You, to the airlock. You, to unloading. Don't just stand there like statues." She was literally turning humans and aliens around with her hands, rearranging them, nudging them with her shoulder. "Faster! Right here! Don't look at me! Hold the container!" Her hands were slipping from the condensation. Her gloves had been soaked for a long time. The air was so heavy it felt like it had to be forced into the lungs. They were holding the airlock open manually. 2 humans had jammed crowbars into the mountings. The alien operator held the overheated circuit with bare manipulators through insulation pads. Tess could see his hands shaking. "Switching!" she shouted. No, it was Veiltoon who spoke. He was already standing inside the emergency ring. Tess stared at him. __quote _195 __. He didn't even look at her. "My tolerance threshold is higher." "Yeah, until you collapse." For the first time, he gave a sharp turn of his head. "Then catch me," and he went back to the circuit. The work dissolved into noise, shouting, and split-second decisions. Someone was passing containers hand to hand. Someone was pulling people out of arriving modules. Someone could no longer tell whose hands were next to theirs. Tess lost track of time. She only had time to yell, "Lower! Hold it! Not there! Stay right here, damn it!" At one point, that same alien operator who had previously scrambled away from her across the entire airlock ended up right beside her. Now he stood shoulder to shoulder, holding part of a mounting, and he was trembling, not from the physical strain. Tess looked at him. "You okay?" He didn't answer. Then he said slowly, quote, 204, quote, 205. Tess opened her mouth and closed it. Then she simply jabbed a finger at the overloaded lock. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 206, underscore, underscore. He nodded. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 207, underscore, underscore. She tapped him on the shoulder. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 208, underscore, underscore. He looked at her for a few seconds, and then, suddenly, he gripped the mounting again. Somewhere nearby, the scent of basil wafted through again. Tess spun around. The capsule lay open near the ventilation flow. Someone had poured the seeds directly into the service tray. Small dark dots clung to the wet metal. No one was hiding them anymore, and the scent moved through the airlock along with the hot air. Humans coughed. Aliens worked. Someone accidentally touched an alien's shoulder. Someone took cargo directly from alien hands, and the line held. A few minutes later, the main screen changed its red signal. The Kel 9 sector stopped falling. Then came the evacuation confirmation, then another. It took Tess a moment to realize the noise had died down. She stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the screen. The airlock was still open, but now it could finally be closed. Veiltoon slowly pulled his hands away from the circuit. There were dark scorch marks from the overheating on his gloves. He looked at Tess. She wanted to say something sharp. Something like, "See, the world didn't end." But she didn't. Because all around them, the alien operators were no longer looking at her. They were looking at him. And Tess suddenly realized one unpleasant thing. The colony had survived. But Veiltoon had just broken the rule that held his entire system together. Someone had brought a diagnostic module, but left it right in the middle of the walkway. Tess tripped over it with the toe of her boot and nearly cursed out loud. The heat from the overload still hung in the airlock. Her gloves were sticking to her hands. Several aliens and 2 of her people sat right by the walls, too exhausted to retreat to their respective sides, and no one was moving away yet. Tess didn't notice it at first. One operator had fallen asleep near an alien console, his shoulder almost touching the secret gardener. An hour ago, half the airlock would have had a nervous breakdown from such proximity. The service screens were slowly flickering back to life after the overheat. A new communication channel flashed on the central panel. Not an emergency one. Administrative. Tess groaned. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 210, underscore, 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 quote, underscore 211, underscore, underscore. Veiltoon stood beside her. The dark marks of the overheat still stained his gloves. He looked at the channel and suddenly froze, even more so than he had by the emergency circuit. "What?" Tess asked. He didn't answer. The system spoke in the dry voice of a translation. Quote, 213, quote, 214. A strange silence followed. Tess blinked. Then she blinked again. A pause. The system repeated it, slower. Tess turned to Veiltoon. Wait, how am I supposed to take this? He looked bewildered, not scared, just like a person who had heard something expected. You preserved my function and status, he said calmly. The responsibility passes to you. What kind of responsibility? Contractual. No, stop. Under contract. What does that mean? He looked at her for several seconds. Me. Somewhere in the back, someone dropped a tool. Tess didn't even turn around. Quote 225 __. Veiltoon frowned. The terms are favorable. You will be granted representative routes, priority protection, internal access. I wasn't saying no to the terms. She pulled off her wet glove and poked a finger into his chest, out of habit. And only then did she realize it had gone quiet around them again. I didn't pull you out of the airlock just to get you. He looked at her, uncomprehending. And that was the most irritating part. Not because he was arguing, but because he didn't see a problem at all. Quote, 230, quote, he said quietly. Quote, 231, quote, 232, quote, 233, quote, 234, quote. The system reacted immediately. Quote, 235, quote, 236, quote, 237, quote. Tess exhaled. She looked at her soaked sleeve, at the humans, at the alien operators, at the open, translucent capsule by the ventilation. It lay right there in plain sight. No markings, no dirt, no attempt to hide it. Someone had already placed a small container of damp soil next to it. A few seeds still clung to the plastic. Tess grunted. Quote, 238, quote. Silence. Even Veiltoon didn't move. Quote, 239, quote. She looked at him tiredly. Quote, 240, quote. He opened his mouth, closed it, then shifted his gaze toward the airlock, toward where the others still stood too close to one another. For a long time. A very long time. Tess was just about to leave to check her tugboat when she heard a step. She stopped. Veiltoon approached, on his own, without an accident, without an order, without a reason. And he stopped beside her, so close that their shoulders almost touched. Tess slowly turned her head. He was looking straight ahead, not at her. I still do not understand your behavior, he said. She smirked. Yeah, well, I don't always understand it myself. For a few seconds they stood in silence. Then the ventilation pushed air through the airlock. The scent of basil drifted in again, and Veiltoon did not take a step back.